Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at some pretty intense ideas from this author, Jorge Majfud.
Majfud.
You say it way better than I do.
Yeah, Mahfouz.
Mahfuz, okay.
Yeah.
And he really kind of tackles some tough stuff, historical injustices,
Yeah.
especially how governments impact people.
Yeah.
And he's really looking at the USA
Yeah.
and how it impacts the most vulnerable people around the world. So
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches.
no, he doesn't.
And I think before we even get into his arguments specifically, it's really important to understand the historical context that he's coming from.
Yeah.
Because he's really looking at the big picture here.
Okay.
He's looking at centuries of global power dynamics,
Right.
Colonialism, economic exploitation, all of that stuff, and how those things have created these really deep inequalities that continue to impact the world today.
Got it. So kind of like setting the stage.
Exactly. And that's why he sees modern immigration not as just a choice that people make,
Right.
but as a direct consequence of all of this history.
Is it saying people don't just decide to migrate on a whim?
Exactly.
There are deeper forces at play.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He argues that it's a direct result of this global system that has always favored the wealthy and powerful at the expense of the poor and marginalized.
Yeah.
And he points to things like colonialism, right? Where you had these powerful nations that were coming in and exploiting resources and people, creating these lasting inequalities.
So it's like the repercussions of those past injustices are still pushing people to migrate.
It is.
Even centuries later.
That's right.
Wow.
And he even goes so far as to say that the concept of illegal immigration was created to serve the interests of these powerful nations. It's a way to control the movement of people and resources to further solidify their dominance.
That's a really bold statement.
It is.
I mean, it makes you question everything you thought you knew about immigration. The word illegal carries so much weight.
Yeah.
It almost automatically paints immigrants in this negative light.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what Majfud wants us to challenge. He wants us to think critically. About how language is used to shape our understanding of these complex issues.
Right.
The very term illegal, it criminalizes people.
Right.
Who are often fleeing desperate situations.
Yes.
Seeking safety, seeking a better life.
So he's saying these powerful nations, they created a system where they benefit from the exploitation of these vulnerable people.
Exactly.
And then they turn around and label those same people as criminals when they try to escape those conditions.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
And to illustrate this point, he provides some really striking historical examples.
Okay.
For instance, he talks about Haiti's fight for independence in 1804. After winning their freedom, former slaveholders actually demanded compensation for their lost property.
Seriously?
Yes, and they were referring to the people that they had enslaved.
I mean, that just highlights how deeply ingrained these power dynamics are.
It does.
It's almost like the idea of human equality was completely absent from their thinking.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder.
Yeah.
Of how these systems of exploitation have been woven into the very fabric of our history. And Majfud argues that these patterns continue to play out today, just in different forms.
Okay.
And he even uses the term modern-day slavery to describe the treatment of some undocumented immigrants in countries like the USA.
He's not holding back at all, is he?
No, he's not.
That's a pretty strong comparison.
It is.
Okay.
But he's calling out what he sees as this direct link between these historical injustices and the current plight of immigrants.
Right.
He points to things like harsh working conditions, low wages, the constant threat of deportation as evidence of this ongoing exploitation.
Yeah.
It's a system that he says is built on fear and preys on the most vulnerable.
Wow. Okay, so we're really getting into it now.
We are.
This is
heavy stuff.
Yeah, this is heavy stuff, but important stuff. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
And it's not even just about the working conditions, It's like the psychological impact.
Yeah.
This constant fear, the uncertainty.
Right.
Families being separated.
So it's like it creates this climate of fear that keeps people trapped.
Exactly.
They're afraid to even speak up.
Right.
Demand better treatment because they're afraid of being deported.
Exactly. And that's where his critique of illegal immigration really comes into focus.
Yeah.
He's arguing that this very notion was crafted to perpetuate these power imbalances.
Right.
It's a way to control and dehumanize entire groups of people, making it easier to justify their exploitation.
So he's saying it's not just about individuals making bad choices.
Right.
It's about a system
Yes.
that's designed to keep certain people vulnerable and powerless.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And to further illustrate this point,
Okay.
he draws this really stark contrast between how wealthy individuals and corporations are treated compared to poor immigrants, right?
Yeah.
The rich can basically move freely around the world, investing in foreign countries with ease.
Yeah.
But the poor are met with suspicion and scrutiny from the moment they even apply for a visa.
It's that whole freedom for the rich, cages for the poor idea.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like if you have money, you can basically buy your way into any country.
Right.
But if you're struggling to survive, you're treated like a criminal for even trying.
And he uses some really powerful imagery.
Okay.
To drive this point home, he talks about how those seeking a better life are often forced to take on these massive debts, paying exorbitant fees to coyotes just for the chance to enter a country that, as he puts it, prints a global currency.
It's almost like a cruel irony, isn't it?
It is.
They're desperate to be a part of the system, to contribute. But the system itself is rigged against them from the very beginning.
Yes, and even if they manage to make it into the country, they face this constant threat of being criminalized and deported.
Yeah.
He describes it as living under a perpetual cloud of terror.
Wow.
A terror that extends to their children, who are growing up in a system that treats them as less than human.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
And it goes back to his point about modern-day slavery, doesn't it?
It does.
You know, it's not just about physical chains.
Right.
It's about being trapped in a system that denies you basic rights and freedom.
Exactly. And he doesn't just focus on, like, the systemic issues, you know?
Okay.
He calls out specific individuals, too.
Right.
He's highly critical of figures like Donald Trump and Elon Musk, accusing them of dehumanizing immigrant workers, perpetuating this culture of cruelty and exploitation.
So he's saying that even within a system that's already rigged, there are people who are actively choosing to make it even worse.
Yes, people who profit from the misery of others.
He doesn't mince words. He labels their behavior as barbaric.
Wow.
And accuses them of fostering an ethic of selfishness that permeates, you know, both individual nations and the global system as a whole.
So this selfish exploitation, it's not just limited to governments.
Exactly.
It's in corporations that benefit from cheap labor, individuals who turn a blind eye to the suffering around them.
Absolutely.
So he's painting a pretty bleak picture here.
He is.
Is there any room for hope in his analysis?
Well,
does he offer any solutions or paths forward?
He does. He believes that change is possible.
Okay.
But it requires a fundamental shift in our thinking.
Okay.
He calls on readers to recognize the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of their origin or their economic status. He urges us to reject that dehumanizing language that's used to describe immigrants and to challenge the systems that perpetuate their exploitation. So it's about more than just changing policies.
Yes.
It's about changing hearts and minds.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing the shared humanity that connects us all.
Precisely. He believes that true freedom and security can only be achieved when everyone has the opportunity to live with dignity and respect.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
It's easy to get caught up in the complexities of the immigration debate.
Right.
But he brings it back to something fundamental.
Yes.
You know, the basic human right to a life free from fear and exploitation.
Absolutely. And he challenges us to ask ourselves some tough questions.
Yeah.
You know, who are we as individuals, as a society?
Yeah.
Are we willing to perpetuate systems of injustice for our own comfort and benefit? Or are we willing to stand up for what's right?
Yeah.
Even when it's difficult.
He's definitely not afraid to shake things up and make people uncomfortable.
No, he's not.
But I think that's what's needed sometimes, you know. We need to be challenged to look beyond our own limited perspectives.
Right.
To see the world through the eyes of those who are suffering.
And he reminds us that silence is complicity. If we see injustice and we choose to ignore it, we become part of the problem.
It's like that famous quote, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Exactly. He's urging us to be those good men and women, to use our voices and our actions to create a more just and equitable world.
He makes a compelling case that the current immigration system isn't just morally wrong, It's also unsustainable in the long run.
Right.
It creates this cycle of poverty and exploitation that ultimately harms everyone.
He does. He challenges us to imagine a different future.
Okay.
One where borders aren't these barriers to human connection and compassion.
Right.
And where everyone has the chance to reach their full potential.
It's a future worth fighting for, isn't it?
It is.
It's a future where we recognize that our collective well-being depends on the well-being of everyone.
Yes.
Regardless of where they were born or how much money they have.
He reminds us that diversity is a strength, not a weakness.
And that a more inclusive and equitable society benefits us all in the end.
Absolutely. He's really a visionary, challenging us to think beyond the status quo and to imagine a world that's more compassionate and ultimately more human.
Yeah, it's inspiring to hear someone talk about these issues, with such conviction.
Yeah.
Such clarity. I mean, it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by it all.
It is.
But he reminds us that even small acts of resistance can make a difference.
He uses this term sepoys of morality.
Okay.
Which, it's a little bit of a jarring term at first, but he's using it to describe these individuals who are willing to challenge the status quo, regardless of their background or their position in society.
So he's not just talking about like activists or politicians.
Yeah.
He's talking about everyday people.
Yes.
Who choose to speak up against injustice and stand in solidarity with those who are marginalized.
He's saying that change happens from the ground up when ordinary people decide they've had enough.
Right.
And they refuse to be complicit in these systems of oppression.
Yeah, and he even calls out like academics, journalists,
yes,
even members of immigrant communities who he says, instead of actually challenging the system,
right,
they kind of propose these solutions that only reinforce the existing power structures.
It's almost like they're benefiting from this system in a way.
Right, or they found a way to benefit.
Yeah.
Even if it's at the expense of others.
Right, and he is definitely critical of those who prioritize personal gain over collective well-being. And he argues that this kind of thinking, it's a symptom of a larger cultural problem, which he calls the pathology of success based on merit and hard work.
Okay.
He says this mentality ignores all of the systemic barriers that prevent so many people
from achieving even basic levels of security and dignity.
It's like that whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing.
Exactly.
Right. Sounds good on the surface, but it ignores the fact that some people don't even have boots.
Exactly. He sees it as a dangerous illusion.
Okay.
That perpetuates this cycle of inequality and resentment.
Right.
He says that true success should be measured by how we treat those who are most vulnerable.
Okay.
Not by how much wealth and power we accumulate at their expense.
So he's calling for like a radical redefinition
of
what it means to be successful.
Yes.
One that prioritizes empathy, compassion, solidarity over individual ambition and material gain.
That's at the core of his message.
Yeah.
He believes we need to move away from this culture of competition and dominance towards a culture of cooperation and mutual support.
Okay.
And he argues that this is the only way to create a truly sustainable and just society, one where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Well, I think it's safe to say that Jorge Majfud has given us a lot to think about today.
He has.
His work is both challenging and inspiring. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
He doesn't shy away from those tough questions.
No, he doesn't.
And pushing us beyond our comfort zones. But I think that's what makes his work so valuable.
Yeah.
He helps us to see the world with fresh eyes, to recognize the interconnectedness of these seemingly disparate issues.
Right.
And to understand the historical forces that are still shaping our present.
And most importantly, he's offering a path forward. He's offering a vision of a better future that's grounded in justice, compassion, and a deep respect for human dignity.
He leaves us with a powerful message of hope.
Okay.
He believes that change is possible.
Right.
But it requires us to be active participants in that change. He urges us to speak out against injustice, to challenge those in power, to stand in solidarity with those who are most vulnerable.
He reminds us that we all have a role to play.
We do.
In creating a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely.
Whether it's through our words, our actions, or just our choices as consumers and citizens, we can all contribute to creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a life free from fear and exploitation.
Well said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the work of Jorge Majfud, we invite you to consider how these ideas resonate with your own life.
Mm-hmm.
What are the systems of power that you're a part of?
Right.
How do those systems impact the most vulnerable members of our society? And what steps, however small, can you take to create positive change?
Great questions to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration and critical reflection.
It's been a pleasure.
Remember, awareness is just the first step. The real work begins when we translate that awareness into action.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.